We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, an update on student loan disability discharges.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a repeat guest, which I think makes her the most number of guest spots on the Crushing Debt Podcast. So my guest is Christie Arkovich. I won't spend a lot of time on a big introduction, except to say that if you want to hear some of what Christie and I talk about in terms of student loans, you can go back and listen to episode 50 of the show, which was on student loan debt generally. You can go back and listen to episode 93, which was Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, the PSLF program. You can go back and listen to episode 99, which is all about the Parents Plus program. You can go back to episode 106, which is all about robocalling and how to stop robocalling. You can go back to episode 234 and listen to us talking about how to discharge debt in bankruptcy. So if you're interested in hearing more about what Christie has to say about how to eliminate student loan debts, episode 50, episode 93, episode 99, episode 106, episode 234, and so now for her sixth appearance on the show, welcome, Christie Arkovich. Thank you for coming back again, Christie.
Certainly. I think we should exchange bottles of wine when we get to number 10.
There you go. We got to do something cool for number 10. And we're here today to talk about folks with disabilities. Now, before we jump into that real quick, I do have to throw a plug to our sponsor, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. Sam is someone who writes errors and omissions insurance or professional liability insurance for people like me and Christie, for attorneys and title companies. He can do it all over the state of Florida. He's also focused on Texas right now and really anywhere in the country. So, Christie, maybe when your E&O comes due, I'll introduce you to Sam. Or if you know an attorney or title company out there that is looking for an update on their errors and omissions policy, their professional liability policy, you would do a great favor to the show. You'd do a great favor to me by just giving Sam a call or emailing him, sam@attorneysfirst.com, or his website, which is www.attorneysfirst.com. However, I wanted to get into this topic of disabilities with disability discharges of student loans with Christie. Now, interesting story in terms of the way that this episode came to be. And so I'm recording this now on Zoom, and I'll put the video up on YouTube. And obviously this will come out as a weekly episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. And Christie also has a YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and search Christie Arkovich, Christie, Christie, and Arkovich is Arkovich. If you search Christie Arkovich on YouTube, you'll get to her channel, her page, and then check out her student loan sidebar, which are a bunch of short video clips on all of these topics. But I think our last episode, 234, about how to discharge loans in bankruptcy, discharge student loans in bankruptcy, I've had a bunch of people call me, contact me, email me, whatever, after watching that show on YouTube. But why don't you tell the story? So somebody contacted you after seeing that video of us?
Sure. So I reached out to you earlier this week and thinking that it would be good to do a disability podcast because, one, the Department of Ed just announced something brand new, really big a couple weeks ago. And also, just a couple days ago, we had a client leave us a review. And interestingly enough, she came from you. She had listened to your show. She had never heard of the Total and Permanent Disability Program before. And that's common, by the way. We have folks that have never heard about it. So they listen to a podcast, maybe of yours, my YouTube channel, or something like that. And so here was her review. And I thought this was awesome. And it was Monday morning. Monday morning is kind of a hard morning to get back into the swing of things. And I want to go read a book. I want to play PlayStation, whatever it is. I'm working at home like everybody else. And so here's a review. I just found out that my TPD application was approved. I can't describe the utter disbelief, deep gratitude, and tremendous relief that I'm feeling right now. Thank you so much to you and your team. 2 exclamation marks, by the way. The last 12 months have been extremely difficult for me, so this is incredible news. And that was awesome because, like I said, she'd never heard of the program. And so I wrote a blog about that this week. We have an active blog, pretty regular posts on there. And I was commenting about how you can't fall victim to groupthink. A lot of folks, they've been dealing with these student loans for 10 and 20 years, and they don't think that they can ever be addressed, that they can ever be forgiven and fully discharged. And that's not what we're seeing out there. And right now we have a good administration that wants to forgive these loans, provided we give them a legal reason to do so. And it's working. So our YouTube channel that you mentioned earlier for me, thank you for that. We're trying to grow our subscribers so that we can continue to offer those. They're only about 5 minutes each. And we're specifically talking about stimulus-related things regarding student loans, because we're seeing a lot of that. Even without the student loan bill, we are seeing probably every few days something new coming out that is addressing some of the problems with our student loans. We don't need Congress for that sort of stuff. This is happening now, and it's not getting a ton of press, some of the things. So if you take a look at my blog, you can see some of these regularity things and our YouTube series.
Some of the things that are in the press, do you think the president is going to be able to forgive some amount of student loan debt by executive order, or is he going to need Congress to do that? Or is he even going to do it?
Sure. Well, that is a subject of debate. They're right now researching the ability of what you can do by executive action. They're also proposing a student loan bill that we expected this summer, but we probably will have it maybe winter or spring. And that's mostly due to the infrastructure bill that's taking a lot of time. And now Afghanistan is probably going to take a lot of time away from Congress as well. So it's going to be delayed. But President Biden has always indicated that he wants to forgive 10,000, but he wants it to be done by Congress. I know that some of like Senator Warren would prefer 50,000 and probably by executive order, but I don't think the Department of Ed is going to do that. I suspect that their focus really is not on across the board forgiveness, but rather on identification of what problems exist. And there are a number of them, and they are revamping all of the rules regarding all these problems. And it's happening, bit by bit.
The problem that I've always had with it, the challenge that I've always had with it is 10,000 going to make a dent? Is 50,000 going to, if you have a doctor that graduated with $400,000 of student loan debt, is 50 grand really going to even make a dent?
Exactly. And that's the problem. I spoke with someone yesterday afternoon, for instance. She owes, I think it was 380,000, maybe 480, something like that. And she was involved in a very severe car accident while she was in medical school. And she was able to graduate, but probably just barely. And she hasn't really been able to work since. She can't physically work in an environment where she's walking. She also has problems sitting. Even working remote is difficult. And so she's never really going to get a return on that investment. She may, be able to work at some fashion. So we need to address that kind of situation too. And a $10,000 or $50,000 write-off towards 380, I think, isn't going to do a thing.
Well, is that maybe where the TPD application, which I assume TPD is total permanent disability, is that a situation where a TPD application would be useful or beneficial?
That's what we're discussing, yes. And I think that it will be in her case. Hers is a little tougher because she only graduated 2 years ago. So we don't have a lot of history there. Most of our clients who come to see us, it's been 10 years or so, but it doesn't have to be. So yeah, we'll be discussing, and we did discuss that with her, and we're going to be going that route.
Well, why don't we get into that? Because that is the topic of the episode today. So what did the Department of Education say about the total permanent disability discharge?
The way it works now is the Social Security Disability Administration will give you an approval for not related to education. But that approval process takes 2 to 3 years to get. There's hearings, there's attorneys, and so forth. So if you have a Social Security disability finding already, it has no relation to the Department of Ed's records or your educational federal loans. And so now they are going to match Social Security numbers. So someone automatically will be discharged of their federal education loan if they qualify for a Social Security disability approval. Now, in our case, it's only going to affect about 1% because usually we're dealing with folks who don't have an SSD approval. But in reality, it's going to help probably 323,000 estimated borrowers, probably over $7 billion, to simply match Social Security numbers. And I think it's a great fix to an existing program, because the people who have Social Security disability approvals already, they generally are fairly, they're not that great in terms of understanding what programs exist, following through with those, making sure, they qualify and such. And my very first client for total and permanent disability a number of years ago, she actually had been approved of Social Security disability, and she mailed in her application to have her federal student loans discharged, and it got lost or something. She never knew what happened, never followed up. And then, so when she reached out to me, she was being, her Social Security was being offset or garnished, and her friends were being contacted with collection calls. And so we remedied that situation for her, but now that will be automatic. So I think that's good.
Automatic in terms of you don't even need to file anything, or you would still have to file something with your student loan company?
Well, come September, they're going to send out notices for those with federal loans, federal education loans, that they will be discharged automatically if they already have been approved for Social Security disability.
Wow. So if you haven't yet been approved for Social Security disability, now is the time to jump on that to get that done. So then,
true, but that takes a while. That's a 2 to 3 year process. Usually, I think the average was about 15 some months is what I was reading. What we offer is a total and permanent disability approval, which is tax-free. Okay. It's also 100% forgiveness of that federal student loan. The advantage of what we're doing is it's only 3 months, and we don't need a Social Security disability finding. So we have a lot of folks who they don't want to file for Social Security disability, but they need to do something about their student loans. That's our group, basically. Those are who we can help.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, it's basically two ways to attack the situation. Either one, if you've already got the SSDI determination, you can do it that way, or number two, you just go directly to the federal student loan servicer with the disability application.
Correct. Okay. And so one of the reasons why it's going so well for our office is that we have a physician that works with our clients. He does VA disabilities also, and he has a occupational medicine specialty. And so initially, I started the process just working with my clients' own physicians. But there's a lot of pushback there. They don't understand the rules. They morally maybe are opposed to it. They just don't understand the definitions and a lot of things about the program. And so it really wasn't working. And so now with our own occupational medicine physician, he can see a lot of different modalities. Geographically, we can do physical appointments. We can do by Zoom if they're not close to our office here in Tampa. And it's a streamlined approach. And we've been very, very fortunate in that we have not had one denied yet. He and I usually work together to eliminate any red flags before we even file the application. Generally, it's approved much less than 3 months, but we say 3 months. We always like to walk in with our clients having a understanding of it could take longer, and then they're pleased, when the result comes in a lot earlier.
Under promise, over deliver.
Exactly.
And so the other thing that, even going back to, we had a discussion about the president or Congress forgiving however 10,000, 50,000, the SSDI disability program, the total permanent disability program. All of this stuff only applies if you have a federal student loan.
That's correct. Most private lenders do not have disability programs. Navient does. It only applies for certain loans. We do have that application on file, but many of them are not covered. So this is mostly for federal loans, and the TPD program specifically is only for federal loans.
Well, and I would assume if it's a serious enough medical issue that would impact borrower's ability to work, and it's private student loan, at that point, maybe that's where maybe a bankruptcy and a hardship discharge might come into play.
Right. We have a few different ways. We try the undue hardship in bankruptcy, correct? We either reopen a bankruptcy or we file a new one. We also sometimes will try to send the disability approval letter over to the private lender and see if they will voluntarily write off the debt. Sometimes it requires a bankruptcy, though, because many of them, they don't send you a letter back saying, oh, my bad, you're right. Our client doesn't get closure that way.
Right.
So we often prefer to do it in bankruptcy where we have a written stipulation, it's binding on all parties, that debt's gone forever. It's also discharged, so there's no taxable event.
Cool. So again, if people want to contact you, they can contact the office at the email address info@ChristieArkovich.com. And again, Christie, Christie, and Arkovich, Arkovich. But again, I'll put that in the notes. So info@ChristieArkovich.com will go to the front desk, and then that'll get routed exactly to where it needs to go. Also search for Christie, search for her on YouTube, and check out the student loan sidebar and all the other videos and information that she's got there. Any other updates? Anything new about to come down the pipe, you think, on student loans?
Yeah, some of the last videos that we did was on the taxable events. That was already passed. So if you settle a private student loan, there's no taxes as long as it's done before the end of 2025. That's huge, because if we get a settlement of, say, 25%, what happens to the other 75%? We don't want a tax bill for that. And so that's pretty significant. We're also seeing rulemaking changes on virtually all of the programs. That's underway right now. There has been just so many little changes here and there. The preemption argument, that's been a biggie. I don't know if you recall, but from our conversation regarding public service loan forgiveness, there's a lot of folks out there that are being, I think, misled in believing that they're in that program, and they don't have the right loan type, so they're really not in that program. And so the question is, how accountable is the servicer for misrepresentations that they might make with public service? And so the preemption argument is the Department of Ed just a couple weekends ago basically turned that on its nose and said, we used to preempt state consumer violations by the Higher Education Act. So federal law trumps private law, state law.
Right.
And now they say, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. And so they changed their policy back to what it used to be a long time ago, that says that if a state consumer has been the victim of some kind of violation, whether it's interest calculation, whether it's forced forbearance, whether it's you're telling them they're enrolled in a program when they're really not, you name it, whatever it is, they're going to hold those servicers accountable. And we, as private attorneys, kind of are like attorney generals, little mini attorney generals out there running around, because now we can sue for that. Before, we faced the argument of our laws were preempted and we couldn't sue for it. Now we have that cause of action and we can go after them. So if one of your listeners has been misinformed by their servicer on something, sometimes there's something we can do about that now. And I think it's that's a key thing. And I didn't hear word one in the press about that. Now, granted, it's a fairly complicated issue. It's not as an easy sell as $7 billion of relief to disabled citizens, but still, it's going to be quite a change to be able to hold the servicers accountable once again.
Yeah, I think that could be. It sounds like a huge win for the consumer to start to allow that or to allow it. The other question that I had for you, I've had this situation come up a handful of times, and I think I've referred a couple of these people to you anyway, but a situation where I think the borrower himself or herself would qualify for some kind of undue hardship argument, some kind of disability argument. However, the borrower is married and the spouse has a job. Now, whether it's a good paying job, whether it's, minimum wage paying job, whatever, does the fact that the spouse has a job impact the ability of the borrower, maybe under an undue hardship test?
It depends on which form you're in. If we're filing a total and permanent disability application, no. The spouse's income makes no difference whatsoever. In fact, that leads me to to mention one of the other new changes, and that is, after we get a total and permanent disability app approved, there's a 3-year monitoring period. And a debtor or borrower can't make more than $17,000, I think it's $17,240 a year for 3 years. That is temporarily suspended due to COVID. It's just been indefinitely suspended. And the Department of Ed has just asked that it be eliminated entirely. That's huge, because I used to tell folks, you can still have a part-time job if you do this. And they need it. They wanted the part-time job to keep active. They needed a little bit of spending money. They needed to be able to do that. Now it may not matter at all, even what that part-time job pays. So that's critical. Now, when I mentioned the platform, it could matter in bankruptcy, for instance. In other words, when we file bankruptcy, the bankruptcy court looks at the household as one entire economic unit. and someone may not qualify for relief if their spouse makes a good deal of money. So they may not be eligible for a type of bankruptcy. The family's income is looked at for the analysis. So it all depends on the platform. For our disability findings, it doesn't matter. For bankruptcy, it probably would.
Okay. And then I guess last thing, COVID. The CARES Act suspended, payments for student loans. What's going on with the CARES Act and COVID? I know the eviction moratorium that's a whole separate podcast, and that's been bantered about by the Supreme Court and whatnot. I know the foreclosure moratorium is over. What's going on with the CARES Act and COVID and student loans?
Okay, a few things. And a lot of folks don't yet know this. The deadline to restart federal student loans is not going to be September as expected. It's been extended one last time till January 31. So that means there will not be any federal student loan payments due that are protected by the CARES Act until February. Another key thing that happened this spring was there's two different types of federal loans, direct loans and the older FEL loans, federal family education loans, something like that. They are going to be receiving the same kind of relief that a direct loan. So in other words, they try to fix the problem where certain federal loans were not eligible for CARES Act protections. And they passed a law that allows for that to be retroactively fixed. So anyone who's been garnished, anyone who's had collection efforts, all that would be reversed in the last year if it's federal. So that's already happening. But this is going to be the final extension. And so there won't be any more forbearances after February 1. They were very, very clear in saying this is the final one. It's gone on, for quite a while. And regardless of what COVID does, I don't think that's going to change. That's why I do expect if there is a student loan bill, it probably will be announced around that time so that people will start to understand, what their options are. The public service servicer is going to switch too. Fed Loan is no longer going to be doing that as of December 14th. That's fairly huge. They're the only servicer for for public service. And so it's going to go to somebody new. So I'm glad they did the forbearance so that will be addressed by a new company as opposed to trying to do that along with restarting payments and having to switch of servicers and things.
Wow.
So the whole system is complex. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not that transparent. But just know, those payments will probably restart in February unless something else is done through some program like disability or, the borrower defense to repayment for fraudulent schools. That's going very, very well right now. Last fall, it was going horribly, but now it's going well. We're getting those applications approved. ITT Tech was just announced in June for 2 areas of approval, job placement, as well as inability to transfer credits. There were 3 small schools that were given full forgiveness for borrower defense applicants in July. So that's moving along, and we're doing those applications. So there's a lot going on in terms of discharging federal student loans. Not as much on private, though. The government has a problem in trying to discharge a private student loan, that third-party contractual rights kind of thing.
Right.
So that's where attorneys like us were trying to settle them, maybe discharge them in bankruptcy, not relying on federal programs for those.
Well, and of course, I think the easiest fix there would just be to make student loans dischargeable in bankruptcy, and that would help cure a lot of it.
Yeah, that's even being talked about too. I'm doing a webinar for CPA Academy on the Fresh Start in Bankruptcy. It's a bill that was proposed by really senators, I think, of both parties. So we'll see how that goes. It's only a bill. It hasn't even been talked about much yet, so it could change substantially. So I won't give any real comments about it, but that's being talked about. Fresh Start in Bankruptcy. It may allow for the discharge of federal and private student loans. We don't know. It doesn't have anything about private yet. But that being said, we don't know what the final version, if passed, would look like.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate you being a guest again for the 6th time on the show. Any last comments? Anything we missed? Anything you want to add?
Well, I would just say that I love your work. And like I mentioned, this client that wrote that fantastic review for us this week was because she listened to your podcast. And I think it's wonderful that you're getting the news out there for the evictions and the foreclosures and, what different laws. I mean, it's hard for a layperson to figure out what's going on. And from your podcast, it's based more on practical advice, what someone can do, just like our YouTube series. I think it's awesome. Thank you for having me as a guest. And I hope you have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. I'm dressed to go kayaking here in a few minutes, or paddling. We've taken up paddling over the last year.
Nice.
It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
Well, and I'm leaving to go out of town for a football game, although it's probably going to be a couple of weeks before we get this episode up and on the air. So by the time people are listening to this episode, Labor Day will be over. Hopefully I'll be in a much better mood about my FSU Seminoles. But thank you again. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you giving all the great content and information and me being able to send these referrals your way so you can help these people with their student loan debts and the other things going on. So again, info@ChristieArkovich.com. Go to YouTube and search for ChristieArkovich.com. Thanks again, Christie. I really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to number 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 coming here in the future. But I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. Thank you again to Christie for helping us all have more money at the end of the month rather than more month at the end of the money. That'll do it for this week's episode, and we will talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.